Hi everyone, this video is going to be about studying for and taking the LSAT and how I raised my LSAT score 7 points from a 168 to a 175. A lot of people have asked for this video in the comments of my very first law school application video, so I'm sorry that it took so long, but basically I tried to plan this video multiple times, but I kept giving up because I just didn't really know what to say, or I kind of felt like what I had to say was not important or wouldn't be helpful. But I finally gathered my thoughts and I think I was able to compile everything in a concise way. So a somewhat obvious disclaimer, but I'm not an LSAT expert or an admissions consultant or anything. I'm just someone who got into a law school that wants to share her experience. Obviously, different things work for different people. Some people pay private tutors, other people only self-study with a textbook. So I'm just going to be talking about what I did and things that I've learned. Actually, first of all, I didn't mention this in my other video, but you definitely do not need a 175 or the same LSAT score as someone else to get into the same schools that they did. Law schools accept, a very wide range of GPAs and LSATs, and especially now with the holistic review of your application, there are a lot of other things that matter. So just keep that in mind that obviously the LSAT score and GPA, those numbers are important, but that definitely does not define your application or define what schools you could get into. So the first time that I took the LSAT was in August 2020 when I got a 168, and then the second time that I took it was actually a few years later in June 2023 when I got a 175. So even just from timeline alone, I feel like my LSAT experience is a bit unique in that there's a good chunk of time between my two test dates, and within that time my goals and motivations changed, I gained work experience, and my environment and living situation changed as well. So I think I'll start this video by talking briefly about how I studied the first time around, and then I'll really get into what I did differently or what I did better the second time around. And then I think I'll end the video with general tips and everything that I've learned. When I was studying for the LSAT for the first time in 2020, it was peak COVID. So I basically wasn't really doing anything else. And I was just self-studying for 3-ish months over the summer in preparation for the August test. So I started by using the Kaplan prep book. And I think that book really taught me the basics and gave me lots of practice questions. I'm not gonna lie, I don't really remember specifically what the book was like. It's been 4 years and I don't have the book anymore. But I will say that when I took the LSAT for the second time a few years later, I caught back on pretty quickly and it wasn't too hard to refresh my memory. So I guess that must mean that the Kaplan book gave me a good foundation and that I truly learned from it. So anyways, after I went through the Kaplan book, I purchased a bunch of full practice exams and I basically just started taking full practice tests and then checking my answers and reviewing on my own. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend doing that, but at the time basically I wasn't really sure when I wanted to go to law school or really what I wanted to do in my career for the next couple of years. So I just think I didn't really have a fire under my butt to plan a proper study schedule or anything. It was just a lot of self-studying with minimal guidance. I would refer back to the Kaplan book to try to figure out why I got something wrong on the practice exam and just try to correct my answers by myself. After studying like that, I took the August 2020 LSAT, which I think was one of the first few digital versions of the LSAT because of COVID. And I think one of my mistakes regarding that was that I had only been practicing with paper exams. I mean, I think on LSAC's website, they did have a few digital practice runs that you could do, but the actual real test was basically one of the first few times that I had tried to take it digitally. With that method, I got a 168, which I was happy with, so I kept the score and I didn't really think about it because like I said, I wasn't really planning on applying to law school like right away. A few years later, I decided that I wanted to apply to law school in 2023 and I wanted to take the LSAT one more time before the 2023 application cycle just to see if I could do better. Situationally, I had more of a time crunch, which motivated me to be way more focused and organized with my studying. So in like September 2022, I think, I hadn't registered for a test date yet, but just in my mind, my goal was the June 2023 exam. So that would mean that I started thinking about the test around like 8-ish months before the actual test date and around 1 year before I was planning on submitting. In my mind, I was thinking, you know, if something went wrong during the test or if it was really, really hard, I would still have some more time before the fall 2023 application cycle to maybe retake it again if I needed to. So basically, in late fall 2022, I started by getting a 7Sage monthly subscription because I didn't want to spend the time or money for like in-person classes or for a live teaching course. I was still working full-time as well, all the way until the beginning of 2023, so maybe for like 4 months-ish. I was kind of using 7Sage like on and off because I was still working full-time. I think I even paused my subscription for a month or two. So clearly like the beginning of my prep for this second time around was very loose. So looking back now, I will say I don't know if I needed that 7Sage subscription at that stage because I was just refreshing my memory from a few years ago. But if you're learning from scratch, I do think that the 7Sage course explains things really well. Or, you know, like I did the first time that I took the test, you could just self-study the basic foundations using a prep book. So for me, I found that 7Sage was actually way more helpful during the next stage of my studying, which was doing practice questions and drilling and identifying my weak spots. And especially because I was taking the digital exam, using an online prep course gave me good practice for like taking an exam on the computer and reading questions off of a computer. And 7Sage's course helped me pinpoint specifically which areas I was weaker in, and then they would create drills that consisted of only those types of questions. So in terms of like the different sections of the LSAT, logic games were the easiest for me because I learned visually, so like drawing out diagrams for the games just made a lot of sense to me. But I know that the LSAT is getting rid of the logic game section, I think. But if you are taking a test with the logic game section, slowing down was the biggest thing that I learned because I would just make silly mistakes, especially because you're reading the question off of a screen and then you have to turn to your paper and draw it out. So in that process, I would miss little details, which are really important in the LG section. And then logical reasoning, LR, was the section where I actually saw the most improvement over the course of my studying. And I really think that 7Sage helped a lot here because their approach to the LR section kind of laid out different rule patterns that you can follow to quickly identify and solve these questions. So yeah, LR was the section that I drilled the most and spent the most time reviewing. Finally is reading comprehension, which I know that most people do not like, and I definitely struggled with, especially if a passage is like super long. Sometimes I would just start reading really fast because of the time constraint, and then I would realize that I didn't actually understand the last 2 paragraphs that I read, and I would just start to panic. So I think for RC, the way that I improved was just practice, 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 practice. So I really had to practice active reading and active focusing. And for me, that meant slowing down, or at least starting slow, because if I started a passage with high anxiety already, that only hindered my ability to understand all of the new words that I was reading. Also for reading comprehension, I had to practice using context clues because a lot of the times the content of the passage was very new to me. Like they're talking about some biomedical engineering things and I don't know what they're talking about. So learning to read intentionally and using context clues was something that I had to practice a lot and get comfortable with. So for scheduling, I'm sorry that I don't really have a set study schedule laid out on a calendar or anything. To be honest, I just followed 7Sage's schedule that they show at the top of their course. It says like you are 60% done with the course or whatever, but basically the progression of my study, the steps I took in order were I learned the basics of the 3 sections. Again, in my case, I had already done this using the Kaplan book a few years ago. Then I started slowly doing practice questions individually, and that helped me identify what types of questions I was getting wrong the most. Then I would move on to drills, so like practice problem sets of my weakest areas. First do the drills untimed and then start putting a time limit. And finally, as my test date got closer, I would do full sections, like a full reading comprehension section, full logic game section, and then eventually full exams. Like the drills, my first exams were untimed, but once I built up that test taking stamina and focus, then I moved on to timed exams. And once I got to that point of taking full exams with a time limit, I think a really important part of my test prep was simulating test taking conditions. So that means I stopped going to cafes, I stopped trying to study in the office after work. I would just be home. I cleared everything off my desk, put my phone away, and then I would just sit and take a full exam with time limit, including the breaks that you would get on the actual test. So I think knowing those steps, I guess you could plan backwards from your official test date. It also depends on like how much time you have every week to devote to actually studying. But I guess in conclusion, if I had to do it all again, I think that I would do a few things differently. First, I would definitely set better goals for myself, like maybe just weekly or monthly goals. The 7-stage course definitely helped me keep somewhat of a schedule, but I was honestly kind of just figuring it out as I did it, which, you know, for me turned out okay, but I think I could have saved myself a lot of time and stress, and maybe even saved myself some money from the 7-stage subscription, just if I had planned a little better. The second thing is I would take blind review a bit more seriously. I think this was because I was self-studying and I didn't actually go to a live class with a teacher. Obviously, after you do a practice question or a practice test, when you're self-studying, you have the option to just check your answers right away and see the correct answer. What I realized a little bit late into my studying is that you should be doing serious blind review, which the 7-stage platform helped me with, because they would show me that I got a question wrong, but they wouldn't tell me what the correct answer was. So basically, I see that I got number 8 wrong, so I would have to go back and re-solve the question again and try to find the right answer. Blind reviewing forces you to rethink through the entire thought process of the question and ask yourself, why was the answer choice that I chose wrong, and what could the right answer possibly be? Finally, I think for test day and after the exam, I would try not to fall into the cycle of just exam anxiety, because at that point, I just needed to trust myself that everything that I've studied up till this point will show through my skills and my focus. One of my pitfalls when it comes to taking exams is just thinking like, what if something goes wrong? What if there's a question that's really hard and I get stuck? What if I run out of time? On test day and post test day, there's nothing much in your control. What is in your control is all the preparation and studying and time that you put into it up until this point, and then you just have to trust yourself, and if something goes wrong, you will figure it out when you're faced with it. There's no point in stressing out about things that didn't even happen yet, because that would just take some focus away from the actual preparation that has been done. So I think that that's kind of everything for my experience with the LSAT. I'm sorry if this was a little bit underwhelming, but I hope that it made sense, and I hope that you found one thing helpful. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.